The coffee cup hit the floor before I could catch it. Hot liquid splashed across Mrs. Dorothy Hayes' worn hands as she knelt on the marble floor of Sterling and Bradford's executive lounge. She gasped, but quietly, like she'd been trained to swallow pain. Mr. Vincent Bradford stood above her, his expensive shoes just inches from the spreading puddle. He didn't move to help. Just looked down with that expression I'd seen too many times, the one that said she was invisible unless she made a mess. Third spill this month, he announced to the room full of executives. Maybe it's time we considered younger staff who can actually do the job properly. Laughter rippled through the morning meeting. Polite, cruel laughter. Mrs. Hayes nodded apologetically, her 72-year-old hands trembling as she reached for her cleaning cloth. I stood 15 feet away, holding my briefcase, wearing a suit they didn't recognize. They had no idea who I was. No idea that the quiet woman scrubbing their floors had once saved my entire future. But they were about to learn. I watched her red, burned skin as she wiped up the mess with practiced efficiency. Nobody offered help. Nobody even stopped talking. Mr. Bradford returned to his presentation about quarterly profits while Mrs. Hayes disappeared back into the walls like she always had, present but unseen, essential but unappreciated. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. This woman had worked in this building for 40 years. 40 years of scrubbing floors, emptying trash bins, cleaning bathrooms that executives barely noticed. 40 years of arriving before dawn and leaving after dark, her body aging prematurely from labor that paid barely enough to survive. And in all that time, nobody had bothered to learn her story. Nobody knew that the kind woman who refilled their soap dispensers and straightened their desk photos was also putting a stranger's child through college. Nobody knew she'd once handed me an envelope with $3,000 and a note that said, "Education is the only inheritance that matters." I was that child. And today, I'd come back to collect a debt this building didn't know it owed. My name is Opal Chun. I'm 31 years old, and most people think I'm just another corporate consultant, polite, efficient, forgettable. I let them think that. Because invisible women get underestimated, and underestimated women get access to everything. 15 years ago, I was a 17-year-old kid with decent grades and zero prospects. My parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving me with foster care and a future that looked like minimum wage and survival. College was a fantasy for kids with families and money. I had neither. Then Mrs. Hayes showed up at the youth center where I volunteered on weekends. She was just the cleaning lady, someone who emptied our trash and mopped our floors. But she'd been watching me study in the corner every Saturday, textbooks borrowed from the library, practicing for SATs I couldn't afford to take. One evening, she pressed an envelope into my hands. Inside was cash and a note. I don't have children. But if I did, I'd want them to have a chance. Use this to take your test. The rest is up to you. That envelope changed everything. I took the SAT, scored in the 98th percentile, applied to 6 universities with fee waivers, got into 4. But acceptance letters meant nothing without tuition money. I called Mrs. Hayes to thank her and tell her I couldn't go. She showed up at my foster home the next day with another envelope, this one thicker. "I've been saving for 30 years, she said simply. "What's the point of money if it dies with you? You're smart. You're kind. You deserve a future." Inside was $12,000, her entire life savings. I cried. She smiled. "Just promise me one thing," she said. "When you make it, remember where you came from. Remember the people who clean floors deserve dignity too." I promised. And for 15 years, I worked toward keeping that promise. Full scholarship plus her money got me through undergraduate. I worked 3 jobs through graduate school. Built a consulting firm from nothing. Climbed every ladder they said kids like me couldn't reach. And now I was back, not as the desperate teenager she'd saved, but as the weapon she'd unknowingly created. Sterling and Bradford had called my firm 3 months ago. They were hemorrhaging money, drowning in employee complaints, facing potential lawsuits from workplace culture issues. They needed someone to quietly fix their mess before it became public. Someone discreet, professional, effective. They had no idea they'd just hired the granddaughter Mrs. Hayes never had. I'd spent 12 weeks embedding myself in their operations, attending meetings, reviewing files, interviewing staff. I documented everything, every dismissive comment, every wage discrepancy, every instance of executives treating support staff like furniture. I built a case so airtight that even their expensive lawyers couldn't argue with it. But I hadn't revealed my connection to Mrs. Hayes. Not yet. Because the best revenge isn't loud, it's surgical. It's watching them destroy themselves while thinking you're there to save them. Mr. Bradford didn't know that the consultant he'd hired to fix his company was actually there to dismantle the toxic culture he'd built. He just saw another professional woman nodding politely in meetings, taking notes, asking careful questions. He had no idea I was sharpening the knife. That afternoon, I requested a meeting with Mrs. Hayes. The HR director looked confused. With Dorothy? Why would you need to speak with maintenance staff? Comprehensive culture assessment, I said smoothly. Everyone from executive to entry level. Standard protocol. They gave me a cramped break room for the interview. Mrs. Hayes arrived nervous, wringing her hands, clearly worried she was in trouble. When she saw me, her eyes widened in recognition. I put a finger to my lips and closed the door. Opal, she whispered. Is that really you? I hugged her carefully, feeling how much frilier she'd become. It's me, Mrs. Hayes. I'm here to help. Help with what? I pulled out my tablet, showing her the employment file I'd obtained. They're planning to force you into retirement next month. They've been documenting minor mistakes, like that coffee spill this morning, to justify termination without full pension benefits. Her face crumpled. I can't afford to lose this job. My medication costs. You won't, I interrupted gently. Trust me. By the time I'm done, they'll be begging you to stay. Over the next week, I worked methodically. Every meeting, every recommendation I made was designed to expose the rot at Sterling and Bradford's core. I discovered that the janitorial staff hadn't received a raise in 7 years despite cost of living increases. I found that executive bonuses had tripled in that same period. I documented that maintenance workers were denied basic benefits that even entry-level office staff received. I recorded that several employees, including Mrs. Hayes, were being pressured to retire early so the company could hire cheaper replacements without honoring full pensions. Each finding went into my report with cold, professional language. No emotion, just facts. The kind of facts that made lawyers nervous and board members sweat. Mr. Bradford called me into his office. Some of these findings are concerning, he said carefully, but surely we can handle this internally. No need to make it official. I smiled politely. My contract requires a comprehensive written report to the board, but I'm sure they'll appreciate your full cooperation in addressing these issues. His jaw tightened. He knew I had him cornered. I scheduled my final presentation for a Friday afternoon, when all board members would be present. Mrs. Hayes was still working, unaware that her fate was about to change. I'd kept her in the dark deliberately. She was too kind, too selfless. If she'd known my plan, she would have tried to stop me, worried about causing trouble. But I hadn't spent 15 years building my career to play it safe now. The boardroom was exactly as I'd imagined. Mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 10 men and 3 women sat waiting, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Mr. Bradford sat at the head of the table, radiating the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. I connected my laptop to the projector. Thank you for your time today. My assessment of Sterling and Bradford's operational culture has revealed several critical issues that require immediate attention. The first slide appeared: systemic inequality in compensation and benefits. Mr. Bradford's confident expression began to crack. This wasn't the gentle recommendations he'd expected. This was a formal indictment. I walked them through everything. Charts showing the widening gap between executive compensation and support staff wages. Graphs demonstrating that janitorial staff turnover was 3 times higher than company average. Records of denied medical leave requests for maintenance workers while executives took unlimited wellness days. Then I showed them the testimonials I'd collected. 23 employees, from janitors to security guards, describing years of dismissive treatment, verbal abuse disguised as jokes, and systematic devaluation of their labor. One board member interrupted. Surely these are isolated incidents. Every organization has occasional personality conflicts. I clicked to the next slide. This is Dorothy Hayes. She's worked here for 40 years. Last month, she received a written warning for performance issues after a coffee spill caused by a meeting attendee bumping her cart. The week before, her request for a day off for a medical procedure was denied. She came to work anyway, despite doctor's orders, because she couldn't afford to lose pay. I let that sink in. Mrs. Hayes represents what's wrong here. Not her performance, your values. The room was silent. I continued, my voice steady. Here's what happens next. You can implement the changes I'm recommending. Fair wages, comprehensive benefits, respectful workplace policies. Or I can submit this report to the labor board and let them investigate. Your choice. Mr. Bradford stood up, his face red. This is outrageous. You were hired to help us, not destroy us. I was hired to fix your culture, I corrected. The destruction you're worried about? You built that yourself. I'm just showing you the blueprint. One of the female board members spoke up. What exactly are you proposing? I outlined my recommendations. Immediate wage increases for all support staff, retroactive pension contributions, comprehensive health care benefits, mandatory respect training for all management, and an anonymous reporting system for workplace grievances. And one more thing, I added. Dorothy Hayes will receive full pension benefits upon retirement, whenever she chooses to retire, plus back pay for 7 years of denied raises. Consider it compensation for 4 decades of undervalued service. The meeting ended in chaos. Half the board was furious, the other half worried about legal exposure. Mr. Bradford tried to have me removed from the building, but the board chair, a woman named Patricia Winters, who'd been quietly supportive throughout, overruled him. Miss Chen is right, she said firmly. We've been ignoring a problem that could destroy this company's reputation. I move that we implement her recommendations immediately. 2 other board members seconded. Mr. Bradford's authority crumbled in real time. I packed my laptop slowly, letting them argue. My work here was almost done. As I left the boardroom, I passed Mrs. Hayes in the hallway. She was pushing her cleaning cart, oblivious to the battle being fought over her dignity. Mrs. Hayes, I said quietly, could you come with me for a moment? She looked worried. Am I in trouble? The opposite, I promised. Trust me. Just come. I led her back to the boardroom, where the board was still in heated discussion. When we entered, conversation stopped. Mrs. Hayes looked terrified, convinced she was about to be fired. Patricia Winters stood up. Dorothy Hayes, please sit down. Mrs. Hayes sat reluctantly in one of the leather chairs, looking completely out of place in her cleaning uniform. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. Patricia glanced at me, then back to Mrs. Hayes. How long have you worked at Sterling and Bradford? 40 years, ma'am, Mrs. Hayes said quietly. And in those 40 years, how many times have you called in sick? Mrs. Hayes thought. Maybe 5 times? I try not to miss work. How many vacation days have you taken? I usually work through them. You get paid out at the end of year if you don't use them. I need the money. Patricia's expression tightened. She turned to Mr. Bradford. This woman has given 4 decades of service. She's worked through illness, sacrificed time off, and apparently we've been systematically undercompensating her. Does that sound right to you? Mr. Bradford said nothing. Patricia looked back at Mrs. Hayes. Ms. Chen has recommended substantial changes to how we treat our support staff, but she also specifically requested that we address your situation. Would you tell the board why she might have done that? Mrs. Hayes looked at me confused. I nodded encouragement. I don't understand, she said. I spoke up. 15 years ago, Mrs. Hayes gave me her life savings so I could go to college. I was nobody, just a foster kid she met while cleaning a youth center. She didn't know me anything, but she believed I deserved a chance. The room went completely silent. That money changed my life, I continued. It's the reason I could build my career. The reason I'm standing here today. Every success I've had traces back to her generosity. So when I learned that the company she'd served for 40 years was planning to cheat her out of her pension, I decided to return the favor. Mrs. Hayes' eyes filled with tears. Opal, you didn't have to. Yes, I did, I interrupted gently. You invested in me when no one else would. This is me investing back. Making sure you're finally valued the way you always should have been. Patricia cleared her throat. The board votes to implement all of Ms. Chen's recommendations, effective immediately. The next week transformed Sterling and Bradford. New wage scales were announced. Benefits packages expanded. Mr. Bradford submitted his resignation. Whether voluntarily or under pressure, I never learned. Patricia Winters took over as interim CEO. Mrs. Hayes received a check for $87,000, back pay, pension adjustments, and accrued vacation time. When HR handed it to her, she sat down in shock. "This can't be right," she whispered. "It's exactly right," the HR director assured her. "We're also increasing your hourly wage by 40%, retroactive to last month." I watched from the doorway as she processed this. For 40 years, she'd scraped by on poverty wages while cleaning up after people who made six figures. And now, finally, someone had bothered to calculate what she was actually worth. She found me in the hallway afterward, the check clutched in her shaking hands. "You did this. You did it first," I reminded her. "You just didn't know I'd be in a position to return it someday." She hugged me tight, this small woman who'd carried such enormous generosity. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you." But I wasn't finished. Money helped, but it didn't change the culture that had devalued her for decades. I wanted more than financial justice. I wanted recognition. I spent the next month working with Patricia to redesign Sterling and Bradford's approach to support staff. We created a new position, Director of Facilities and Culture, with actual authority and a seat in management meetings. We implemented quarterly appreciation events where executives served lunch to maintenance staff instead of the other way around. And I proposed something bigger, the Dorothy Hayes Scholarship Fund. "We're a financial services company," I told the board. "We have resources. Let's use them to do what Mrs. Hayes did for me. Give opportunities to kids who deserve them but can't afford them." The board approved a $500,000 initial endowment. The fund would provide full college scholarships to children of Sterling and Bradford support staff. The first recipient would be selected next year. When we told Mrs. Hayes, she couldn't speak for 5 minutes. She just cried, overwhelmed by the idea that her name would be attached to something that helped others the way she'd helped me. 3 months later, we held a company-wide event to officially launch the scholarship fund. The entire staff was invited, executives, analysts, support workers, everyone. For the first time in Sterling and Bradford's history, the cleaning crew wasn't there to work. They were there as honored guests. Mrs. Hayes sat at the head table, wearing a new dress I'd helped her pick out. She looked beautiful and terrified, and used to being the center of attention. Patricia gave a speech about the company's commitment to equity and respect. Then she invited me to speak. I walked to the podium, looking out at faces I'd come to know over these months. Some had been skeptical of the changes. Others had embraced them enthusiastically. But all of them were listening. 15 years ago, I was a kid with no future, I began. Then a woman I barely knew gave me everything she had. She didn't do it for recognition or repayment. She did it because she believed everyone deserves a chance, regardless of where they start. I gestured to Mrs. Hayes. Dorothy Hayes spent 40 years cleaning this building. Most of you never learned her name, never thanked her, never considered that the woman scrubbing your floors might also be changing someone's life with her generosity. I continued, my voice steady but emotional. She worked until her hands ached and her back gave out. She sacrificed her own comfort so others, including me, could have opportunities she never had. And this company responded by undervaluing her, underpaying her, and planning to cheat her out of the retirement she'd earned. Some executives looked uncomfortable. Good. They should be. But here's what I learned from Mrs. Hayes, I said. Dignity isn't given by title or salary. It's inherent. Every person in this building, from the CEO to the night janitor, deserves respect. The Dorothy Hayes Scholarship Fund exists to honor that principle, to invest in potential wherever we find it, regardless of where someone comes from. The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Hayes was crying again, overwhelmed by the recognition she'd spent a lifetime without. Patricia presented her with a plaque that would hang in the main lobby. Dorothy Hayes, in recognition of 40 years of dedicated service and extraordinary generosity. Afterward, people lined up to thank her, shake her hand, apologize for years of not seeing her. She accepted every word with grace, her dignity intact despite decades of being treated as invisible. The scholarship fund changed everything. Applications poured in from children of support staff across the company, kids who'd grown up watching their parents work difficult jobs for little recognition. We selected our first 5 recipients, 3 children of janitors, 1 security guard's daughter, and 1 son of a cafeteria worker. At the award ceremony, Mrs. Hayes met each recipient personally. She gave them the same advice she'd given me. Education is freedom. Use it to build a life where you're valued. And when you make it, remember to lift someone else up too. One girl, a 17-year-old named Destiny whose mother cleaned the executive bathrooms, hugged Mrs. Hayes tight. Thank you for starting this. My mom cries every night about how she can't afford to send me to college. Now I can go. Mrs. Hayes smiled through tears. Your mother's work matters. Never forget that. And neither should anyone else. The ceremony made local news. Reporters loved the story. Wealthy financial firm creates scholarship for children of its own workers. Several other companies reached out, interested in creating similar programs. What started as justice for one woman became a movement. 6 months after my initial presentation, Sterling and Bradford looked completely different. Employee satisfaction scores had doubled. Turnover among support staff dropped by 70%. The company actually won an award for workplace culture improvement. Ironic, considering where they'd started. But the best change was subtler. Executives started learning names, saying thank you, treating support staff like colleagues instead of servants. It wasn't perfect, old habits die hard, but it was progress. Mrs. Hayes decided to retire on her own terms. She was 73 now and her body needed rest. But she left with dignity, a full pension, health care coverage for life, and a retirement party that packed the company cafeteria. I gave a toast. Most people leave behind job titles and performance reviews. Mrs. Hayes is leaving behind changed lives and a scholarship fund that will help hundreds of students. She's leaving behind proof that one person's generosity can reshape an entire company's values. That's a legacy worth celebrating. The crowd, a mixture of executives and maintenance workers, finally in the same room as equals, applauded. Mrs. Hayes stood, her eyes shining, and simply said, "Thank you for finally seeing me." On her last day, I arrived early to walk her out. She'd insisted on cleaning her favorite hallway one final time. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to say goodbye properly. I found her running a dust cloth along windowsills on the executive floor, the same hallway where Mr. Bradford had humiliated her over spilled coffee months earlier. But now, those windows reflected a different reality. A plaque with her name, a scholarship fund bearing her legacy, a company forced to confront its failures. "Ready?" I asked gently. She nodded, setting down her cloth for the last time. "I spent 40 years in this building, raised a daughter here in spirit, even if she wasn't mine by blood. I was yours in every way that mattered," I said, taking her hand. We walked through the building together, Mrs. Hayes in civilian clothes instead of her uniform. People stopped us every few feet to say goodbye, to thank her, to wish her well. The security guard who'd worked overnight shifts with her for 15 years hugged her tight. The receptionist gave her flowers. Even the new CEO, Patricia's permanent replacement, a man I'd vetted personally, came down to shake her hand. Outside, the morning sun was bright and warm. Mrs. Hayes stood on the sidewalk, looking back at Sterling and Bradford's gleaming towers. 40 years of her life contained in that building. 40 years of invisible labor, finally recognized. "I used to think I didn't matter," she said quietly, "that I was just furniture. Something necessary but forgettable." "You were never forgettable," I told her. "They just weren't paying attention. But they are now, and they will forever." She squeezed my hand. "You did more than pay back money, Opal. You paid back dignity. That matters more than you know." I learned from the best. We stood there a moment longer, saying goodbye to a chapter of her life that had finally gotten the ending it deserved. Then I drove her home, Not to the cramped apartment she'd rented for decades, but to a new place I'd helped her find. Bright, comfortable, a reward for 40 years of sacrifice. As she settled into her new life, I returned to my work. But Sterling and Bradford remained a special project. I stayed on as a consultant, ensuring the changes we'd implemented didn't fade when attention moved elsewhere. 1 year after Mrs. Hayes' retirement, the scholarship fund had grown to $2 million. We'd helped 15 students attend college, kids who would have otherwise worked minimum wage jobs or drowned in student debt. Each one of them met Mrs. Hayes at least once, learning the story of the woman who'd started it all. Sterling and Bradford's culture continued improving. Other companies started calling, wanting to replicate our model. I found myself speaking at conferences about workplace dignity and how investing in all employees, not just executives, created stronger organizations. But my favorite moments were simpler. Like when Destiny, the scholarship recipient whose mother cleaned bathrooms, called to tell me she'd made Dean's List. Or when Mrs. Hayes attended her first scholarship ceremony as a guest of honor instead of the cleaning lady in the corner. The building's main lobby still displayed her plaque. New employees learned her story during orientation. She'd become part of Sterling and Bradford's institutional memory, not as the invisible janitor, but as the woman who proved that generosity creates ripples far beyond what we can see. 2 years after her retirement, Mrs. Hayes' health began failing. The decades of physical labor had taken their toll. I visited her often, bringing groceries, helping with errands, just sitting together in comfortable silence. One afternoon, she took my hand. "I need to tell you something. Anything." "I'm not afraid to go," she said softly. "I got to see what that money became. Got to see you build something beautiful from the chance I gave you. That's more than most people get." Tears blurred my vision. "You gave me everything." "No," she corrected gently. "I gave you a start. You did the rest. And you turned it into something that will help people long after we're both gone. That's the greatest gift." She passed away 3 months later, peacefully, surrounded by people who loved her. The funeral was packed. Former co-workers, scholarship recipients, executives who'd learned too late how much she'd mattered. Patricia gave a eulogy. So did I. "Dorothy Hayes taught me that worth isn't measured by job title," I said, looking out at the crowd. "It's measured by how we treat others when there's nothing to gain from kindness." She gave everything to a stranger, changed my life, and through me, changed hundreds of others. After the funeral, I returned to Sterling and Bradford one more time. The scholarship fund continued growing, now at $5 million with plans to expand nationally. Mrs. Hayes' plaque remained in the lobby, polished and prominent, but I wanted something more permanent. I worked with the board to establish the Dorothy Hayes Center for Workplace Dignity, a research and training division dedicated to ensuring fair treatment of all employees, regardless of position. It would provide resources, conduct studies, and help other companies build cultures where people like Mrs. Hayes would never be invisible again. The center opened 1 year after her death. We held a ribbon-cutting ceremony on what would have been her 76th birthday. Her daughter, estranged for years but reconnected in her final months, attended. So did all 15 scholarship recipients. I gave a short speech. Mrs. Hayes once told me that education is the only inheritance that matters. But she was wrong about one thing. Dignity matters too. Respect matters. Kindness matters. This center exists to honor her memory by ensuring others receive the dignity she deserved all along. 5 years later, the Dorothy Hayes Scholarship Fund has helped 63 students attend college. The Center for Workplace Dignity has trained over 200 companies. Sterling and Bradford is considered a model for equitable workplace culture, a reputation that would have been unthinkable before Mrs. Hayes' story forced them to change. I still visit her grave regularly, updating her on everything her generosity continues to create, telling her about students who graduated, companies that reformed, lives that shifted because one woman decided a struggling teenager deserved a chance. "You thought you were just a cleaning lady," I tell her headstone, "but you changed the world, one envelope at a time, one act of kindness that grew into a movement." Her legacy isn't the floors she cleaned or the trash she emptied. It's the proof that dignity and generosity create ripples we can't predict. That investing in others, especially when we have little to give, plants seeds that grow into forests. Mrs. Hayes saved me. I made sure she knew it before she died. But more importantly, I made sure she saw her kindness multiply far beyond what either of us imagined. That's what I promised her 15 years ago, to remember where I came from and lift others up. That promise became my life's work. And every scholarship awarded, every policy changed, every person treated with dignity they'd been denied, that's all her. She cleaned floors for 40 years, but she's remembered forever as the woman who changed everything.